How's it going, Guardians? It is your boy Turkey here at SGN Hub bringing you another Titan build video. And as I mentioned in the previous video, I am kind of becoming somewhat of a Peacekeeper connoisseur, if you will. And this one is going to be another Peacekeeper video. And I was able to squeeze my favorite exotic, one of my favorite exotics in the game into it. And it wasn't just kind of like throwing it in there for BS. It was actually because I kind of got a role that I was somewhat happy to get on a heavy GL, and this also provides a lot more utility to the build. But without further ado, let's get into it. As I mentioned, this is another Peacekeeper Titan build. So for those who don't know, Peacekeepers got a buff not too long ago. It's very similar to Lucky Pants for the Hunters, except for, in my opinion, I've been using this a lot more lately. For those who don't know, the Peacekeepers were very PvP dominant for quite some time, and they now finally got a PvE buff applied, which is any bullet that you hit, as long as it's within, a second of the next one, will apply 5% more damage buff to the next shot. And this stacks all the way up to 100%, so you have stacks of a buff up to 20. As long as you're able to maintain damage on the target, that buff seemingly doesn't go away. For as long as you're able to keep that damage up, you'll have that 100% damage buff on your gun. So that was a really great addition to it, which opened the door for a lot of really cool builds for PvE, for Titans finally, to use rather than Actium-based builds or LMGs or just punching or things like that. With that being said, the YarovitMG4, another world drop similar to the Parabellum, has some pretty interesting rules on it. I'd say probably two in particular that I would actually go after, but I think the main rule that allows us to play with Peacekeepers the best is going to be rewind rounds and deconstruct. Obviously, if this did have something available like Frenzy, which it doesn't, I think that would be solid, but it does have desperate measures and also collective action available to it. Now, there are a couple things that make this really, really solid, other than the fact that, it does pair very, very well with the exotic and what it does for us. But one of the things that this does better than the Parabellum does is what we have in our artifact mods this season. The one in particular is Wind Chill. Rapid precision hits from a stasis weapon will grant you a stack of frost armor. And the thing about this is you're going to be aiming for the dome a lot of times, especially in boss encounters, and that is what this is going to do for you. You're going to be getting tons of stacks of frost armor, so you don't really have to swap off as much as you would with other weapons. And you don't have to worry about the damage you're taking, I guess. And the exotic pairing that we have with this, the Edge of Action, is what makes it really solid. For those who don't know, rewind rounds, it reloads up to 60% of the magazine based on the number of hits that you shot, or I'm sorry, the number of hits that you were able to land from that magazine. And next up we have Deconstruct. Dealing sustained damage grants bonus damage against vehicles and constructs for an improved duration and refills ammo from reserves. Damage with primary ammo or against constructs provides additional progress. Constructs include barricades, stasis, crystals, turrets, and other objects created in the field. This also includes the newly added, well, not newly added, I guess, Briggs in the newly added dungeon, the Vespers host, so you're going to get some extra damage to things like that as well. I think it's 40% damage. I'm relatively certain it's a roughly 40% damage bonus, so if you are able to start running into a lot of enemies, this will shine even better. You got to put that on top of the 100% that you're getting from Peacekeepers from maintaining that uptime. Now, the exotic pairing that we have in our second slot is going to be the Edge of Action, and I like to actually provide options for those who don't want to use the same thing. So if you aren't somebody who's that much interested in using the Edge of Action, I'll go over a possible substitution in my opinion after I explain why. So we have the Edge of Action, which is the glaive in our second slot. It is the Void specific one, the Titan, and the exotic perk is as follows, which is Remote Shield. When weapon energy is full, or firing to make your next shot deploy a protective shield on impact. Passing through the protective shield provides a Void Overshield and improves weapon damage, reload speed, and handling. This has been one of my favorite exotics, honestly, for quite some time. As you can see, I crafted it January 4th last year, and I've been using it a pretty good bit ever since then, as well as the Edge of Concurrence on the Hunter. This provides a 5% damage buff and that Void Overshield as well. And with Void Overshields being buffed this patch, that stacking that on top of the Frost Armor that you're certainly going to have, you're a very difficult target to kill. And typically, whenever you sacrifice, in my opinion, your special slot for a glaive or something, you're going to be losing a lot of damage. But what you're really getting is the utility safety for your team, an overshield, and a damage buff for your Peacekeepers that now have the 100% damage buff applied to them via the recent buff thanks to Bungie. And this is absolutely incredible for boss DPS whenever you don't have anything else to use, or if you're out of heavy ammo. I think I was managed to do roughly like 4.2 million only using just the SMG and the testing, and I'll try to include that footage in the background. But you can just test this out for yourself. It's such an autopilot style of play, and it works in almost all places in content. The Peacekeeper rework has been phenomenal, and pairing it with the Overshield and a little bit of extra damage as well just makes it even better in my opinion. Now, I mentioned there are, in my opinion, an acceptable replacement, and the thing that I would consider an acceptable replacement is something that does constant damage, because I think that's the idea of the build, and if you can like toss a Geo around or some type of area denial, this is going to be from the dungeon, the most recent dungeon, the Vespers host, and this is the VS Velocity Baton. Now, the best roll that you can get is going to be some pairing of attrition orbs. That seems to be what most people want. But if you're not really too worried about the orbs and you just want the damage, you could also get Repulsor Brace and Destabilizing rounds, which I was lucky enough to get, as well as a couple attrition orbs rolls. So this is going to function very similar to the Lost Signal, where you can just shoot this, leave those, on the enemy, and just start shooting with your SMG again, and this will then free up the exotic slot for you to use something in your heavy slot, maybe galley, maybe tractor cannon, or something to match that surge. I don't know what your preference is, but that does free up that slot because the star of this build is going to be the Stasis SMG, giving you that frost armor. I guess we could briefly go over our mods and stuff, and then we can go over the fragments and aspects, and that'll really wrap it up, because this build, like I said, functions super similar to the Parabellum one I posted recently. But in the heavy slot, just to match the stasis, we actually have the new VS Chill Inhibitor. I don't have the bait and switch and Envious roll, unfortunately, but Explosive Light gives you roughly, I think, a 60% damage buff. So if I can find a way to net those orbs quicker or have shoot to loot, I think this could be, a potential contender with the bait and switch roll. But without further ado, let's go into your armor slot. Obviously, with the way this build functions, we're going to have 3 time dilation just to have as much uptime on that stasis surge as we possibly can. In our Peacekeeper, our boots, we have triple stasis surge, obviously. That's just going to buff the damage. Next up, we have Lucent Blades times 2. A lot of people would question, why do I have the Lucent Blades times 2 instead of any type of reserves? A lot of people don't realize that if you have the Lucent Blade mods on, this will actually give you more glaive energy on impact of a shot from the glaive. So as opposed to hitting 4 shots to get our bubble shield up and available, it's only going to be 3 shots. So that gives you much higher uptime on your void shield, and that overshield and that bubble lasts roughly, I think, 10 to 15 seconds somewhere. So it's not like a very small time that this bubble is on the field. It absorbs a very substantial amount of damage. So I think it's worth putting the Lucent Blade mods towards it to be able to get it faster. Next up, in our gloves, we have just a couple stasis loader mods. There's probably some empty slots there, and that's really preference, because I don't even think you need the stasis loader mods with Peacekeepers. I feel like you get inadequate reload time, especially given the fact that we are going to be amplified at times on Prismatic. Next up, we have Void Siphon, obviously, for the glaive, and Stasis Siphon, and a heavy ammo finder mod. And the stat allocation is just 100 resilience, 90 discipline, 90 strength. I'm sure I could kind of tighten that and get a couple hundreds on one thing, but I don't really feel, I feel like that's pretty negligible. And now diving into the aspects and fragments, I feel like the barricade, for me, I prefer the rally barricade because I like to pop it right outside of my bubble, but you could use thrusters, whatever else you want to. Lift, same thing. Now, in this slot, we have Frenzy Blade, obviously. I feel like that's just kind of a no-brainer for a Prismatic Titan. That's really like a get-out-of-jail-free card in combination with Consecration. The Grenade is also something that you can choose to use, but if you're going to try to put some damage on a boss, I feel like prior to popping Prismatic, you're going to want to just use the Pulse Grenade. You can just chuck it at the boss's head and then, do your thing. So our aspects, we're using Knockout, critically wounding a target or breaking a target shield, infuses your melee attacks with the Arc Energy, increases your melee range damage for a short time, defeating targets with melee attacks, makes you amplified and all that jazz, blah, 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 defeating more powerful combatants, increases the amount of health restored. So we're using Knockout. Long story short, Knockout, Fragment Slot 1. Man, that's a long description. Next up, we have Consecration. While sliding, activate your charge melee ability to launch a wave of solar energy forward, damaging and scorching targets in front of you as you leap in the air. And then while you're airborne, slam the ground. Boom. Titan explosions, fire. We all see this. Next up, we have our fragments. So this is, I feel like this is probably also pretty interchangeable. We have so much stuff with Prismatic, but this is just kind of what I landed on. Your Arc, Solar, and Void abilities deal increased damage to targets afflicted with Darkness debuffs, and that is going to be the Facet of Courage. I think you get the 10 discipline from it as well, so I felt like that was pretty useful. Facet of Purpose, I feel like this is another one that's not necessarily a no-brainer. This will be your choice, but I feel like for the build it's pretty useful. Picking up an Orb of Power grants either Amplified, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield based on the damage type of your equipped super. And we are using Twilight Arsenal for the extra damage, so we're going to be getting a Void Overshield whenever we do get Orbs of Power on top of the stacking Frost Armor from the artifact mods. Next up, we have Facet of Solitude. Landing rapid precision hits emits a severing blast from the target. While Transcendent, the severing blast is bigger. So a little bit more utility to us just spamming our SMG as much as we possibly can. Next up, we have Facet of Dawn. Powered melee hits against targets makes you radiant. Powered melee final blows make you and nearby allies radiant. So that's just another way to maintain a little bit more damage. You're not going to get the radiant as long as you would from solar subclass. I think it's roughly 5 seconds or something like that. But with solar, I think it goes up to like 10 to 11. And lastly, we have Facet of Devotion. Defeating targets afflicted with stasis or strand debuffs grant bonus light transcendence energy. And that's going to cap us off on our fragments. And I don't really feel like there's much else I can go over, honestly, with the build, because it's just a very simple, straightforward build. Pull out Yarovit, click at boss, and rinse and repeat. Reload and just shoot. But it's such a satisfying loop, and for me personally, being able to use the glaive in it, I was really happy about that. And it is an interchangeable thing, like I said, to those who don't want to use the glaive. One that I've been kind of messing with also was Tessellation, because you get a very, bursty shot whenever you're going to consume your grenade and launch that as well. So that's also something potentially worth using. But there's not really much more I can say about the build other than I hope you guys enjoy it and be on the lookout for some more potential Hunter/Titan builds coming in the near future and other videos on the channel as well.